So, our brave new world is heading towards a day where we'll no longer use fossil fuels or hydrocarbons for energy, and we'll not be eating meat as much. We'll be eating more bugs. It's a very exciting time in our lives. Now, a lot of you may realize that this whole transition to net zero and the whole 2030 agenda that our world is heading towards is unrealistic. But even if you do realize that it's unrealistic, you probably don't even know the extent to how unrealistic it actually is. The other problem is some people don't realize it's not unrealistic. They actually think this could happen. Well, I'm going to bring you a report today out of the Manhattan Institute, and it's about the delusion of climate transition and how we need a reality reset. So, stick around to the end of this and get this information out to as many people as you can. Thank you. So, to get a real sense of where we have to go with this whole energy transition, it's a good idea to look at where we are now and how we got here. So, at the current stage, we have an energy policy that really shuns hydrocarbons and coal, fuel. This can all be traced back to 1975 with the Energy Policy and Conservation Act. This was a omnibus bill that was passed sort of in a panic after the oil embargo of 1973 to 1974. And ever since this bill was passed, our policy has always been leaning towards avoidance, conservation, and replacement of fossil fuels or hydrocarbons. And at that time, we had no idea how oil rich we actually were. In fact, it was illegal to export oil up until the Obama administration. And in 1972 and also in 1982, bills were passed to block exploration for oil in 90% of our offshore areas. The 10% that we are allowed to drill from, it actually supplies 15% of our current supply of oil. Now, with that said, solar and wind only account for less than 5% of the world's energy supply. In fact, we get more energy in our world from burning wood right now, 5 times as much energy from burning wood as we do from solar and wind. And we want to replace 84% of the world's power source right now, which is based off of hydrocarbons, with electricity. Over the past 20 years, our government has pushed trillions of dollars into subsidies in trying to study and develop these green technologies, but the dent in dependence on hydrocarbons has only been 2%. Now, currently, natural gas is responsible for 40% of manufacturing in the world. And natural gas is also responsible for a quarter of the electricity and power. Coal is responsible for 40% of the world's electricity, and 70% of steel manufacturing is dependent on coal. And that is really 50% of its production is the energy. Now, the EU president recently said, quote, "We are doubling down on renewables. It is important for our strategic energy dependence," unquote. And that means that they are banning the gas vehicles in 10 years, which is the same thing that California is doing, and by default, other states that signed on to an agreement with them. And also, our own government officials are saying these things. This is Janet Yellen.
Our plan, powered by the Inflation Reduction Act, represents the largest investment in fighting climate change in our country's history. And it will put us well on our way toward a future where we depend on the wind, the sun, and other clean sources of energy. We will rid ourselves from our current dependence on fossil fuels.
Here's another short clip of Janet Yellen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the...
Now, that wasn't really Janet Yellen, but I can't help but to think of Aunt Bethany every time I see her. Anyways, here is a clip of the less humorous Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the EU, and what she plans on doing about this energy crisis in Europe.
We have Repower EU on the table. The renewables are cheap, they are homegrown, they make us independent. We will deploy renewables this year that are an equivalent to around about 8 billion cubic meters. So the renewables are really our energy insurance for the future.
Maybe it's just me, or she just didn't sound like she really believed what she was saying. Now, here is her again talking about flattening the curve. You remember flatten the curve from the old COVID failed lockdown plans. We wanted to flatten the curve. Well, remember how well that worked? Let's see if it'll work for the EU this time. Let's listen.
We will put forward a set of 5 different immediate measures. The first one is smart saving of electricity. What has changed over the summer because of the elements I was just mentioning, that we see there's a global scarcity of energy. So whatever we do, one thing is for sure, we have to save electricity, but we have to save it in a smart way. If you look at the costs of electricity, there are peak demands. And this is what is expensive, because in these peak demands, the expensive gas comes into the market. So what we have to do is flatten the curve and avoid the peak demands. We will propose a mandatory target for reducing electricity use at peak hours, and we will work very closely with the member states to achieve this.
Now, if you have a smart thermostat, which a lot of us do, and hey, I love smart technology, don't download your local power plant or power company's app. A lot of times they'll give you an incentive to download their app. Well, guess what they can do now when they have access to your app is they can actually change your thermostat. So if they think your air conditioning is too low, they'll change it for you, which is, I guess, convenient. You don't have to get up and do that. But I don't want somebody else messing with my AC or heat. Do you? So normally, energy counts for less than 10% of the cost of a product. But doubling the cost of energy would have ripple effects throughout the whole economy. And it would be hard to state how bad it would be. A lot of economists think the great inflation from 1965 to 1982 was from the constantly rising oil prices. And a lot of this inflation was outside of the control of monetary policy. So this is going to cause a lot of inflation. It's going to cause a lot of financial heartache. And if you look at Gallup and see what really matters to people, the most important thing that matters to them is their wealth and their financial stability and inflation. When you look at that and think about climate change doesn't even make it to the top 10 on people's care about list. So we are going to sacrifice everybody's number one care for something that's not even on the top 10 list. And so this can't be a populist type movement. I think they've got a lot of people convinced, but I don't think everybody buys into it like the people who are in charge do. I don't think anybody really ever took them seriously and thought it was just a funny thing that would pass. But now that these people are in control, they are actually implementing these dangerous policies and trying to move our world in a whole nother direction. Now, there are some immutable facts about energy that we need to get out of the way so that you can really understand the scale of all this and how dependent we are on energy and how much energy. The digital technology that we have today, like smartphones and computers, that requires 1,000 times more energy to produce than a lot of the products that we had in the 20th century. And historically, the energy to produce an item was tracked by its weight. For example, a refrigerator would weigh 200 times more than a hairdryer. So, and a hairdryer would take 100 times less energy to create. Does that make sense? Well, now it takes 1,000 times more energy to create one smartphone than it does one refrigerator. And right now, the world is producing 10 times more smartphones than they are refrigerators. So this really pits philosophy and wonderful aspirations against physics and technology. And one of the things that we can look at is the costs. We can look to Germany and Britain for a great example of what this looks like. And because they're way ahead of us in this transition. Their energy prices have gone up 60 to 110% over the past 20 years, despite a drop of 70% in the cost of oil and natural gas. So a lot of people say that the reason nobody wants an electric vehicle is because they have range anxiety, which means they're afraid of how far the vehicle can go. And realistically, electrical vehicles now can go just as far as a regular gas vehicle. The problem is how quickly you can refuel the thing. A gas car takes about 5 minutes to refuel, but an electric vehicle takes about 10 hours to recharge. And imagine trying to go across country on a trip. You would have to stop for every time that a car would have to stop and just get some gas. You would have to stop for the night. It's nowhere close. And they are talking about rapid charge technology that can lower this to 30 to 45 minutes. But even with that, think about going to a power station. How many power stations would have to be there in order to service everyone who needs to get charged up? Because it takes so long to charge. The infrastructure for all of this would be insane. So the International Environmental Agency, the IEA, their plan would require 1,000 times more material to build all of this infrastructure, and that would only give us the same output of energy. That's the equivalent of rebuilding, not refurbishing, rebuilding from scratch all of the highway that's been built since 1921 and rebuilding it with 1,000 times more material. This energy shift would take us from a fuel-intensive energy economy to a materials-intensive energy economy. Now, this obviously means we have to increase our material output. And for some of these precious metals, the outputs are astronomical. For example, we're going to need to output 4,200 times more lithium, 2,500 times more graphite, 1,900 times more nickel, and our rare earths need to be upped by 700%. It's also important to keep in mind that the average time from taking a property and qualifying it to be a mine and then it actually becoming a functioning mine is usually about 16 years. So this isn't feasible. There's not even a plan in place to even try to get to this point. This is something that I think a lot of these people didn't even take into account. So they're not even trying. But still, we must depend on them to save us and the planet. And think about where all of these materials would be coming from. You know that Afghanistan has one of the largest lithium deposits in the world. And we already depend on 100% of imports for a lot of our important strategic minerals or material. And then guess who is the big king in minerals? That's China. They have 2 times the market share in the mineral market than OPEC has in the oil and gas market. It's a huge share, and climate change really does help China. China also has 80% of the market on polysilicon, and polysilicon is vital to making solar panels and things like that, but it's also very energy intensive to create. And China is 80% of the market share on polysilicon. So if you find a nice affordable solar panel, there's an 80% chance it came from China, and probably greater than that. The reason that it's cheap is because they're made with factories that are powered on cheap burning coal-fired power plants. And that's how China is able to create such cheap products. Just think of how the geopolitics would change if we went from dependent on oil and gas to minerals. We would lose all of our power to negotiate. We would lose all of our financial power. It's like committing economic suicide. Now, wind, solar, and battery prices have been going up, despite the fact that they are just a small portion of the energy output. And really, the largest reduction in price of batteries is the manufacturing developments that they've come up with. It's not the materials. In fact, the materials account for about 60 to 70% of the product. So when the materials start going up, you can expect the price of a battery to continue to go up. And Morgan Stanley has estimated that electric vehicles, the makers will have to charge 25% more for their vehicles to actually make a profit. And this is the same thing with solar panels. The solar panels are getting cheaper because the manufacturing processes have advanced to make them cheaper, but the materials now make up for 70% of the cost. So the material will continue to rise in cost, which means the lowering of the costs is over. Let me show you this quote from the International Energy Agency report. Quote, rising commodity prices have increased the cost to produce solar PV modules, wind turbines, and reversed the cost reduction trend that the industry has seen for more than a decade. So I hope you can see now just how ridiculous of a dream this whole energy transition is. And I want you all to be armed with this knowledge because you can share it. Share it with other people and wake them up too. And thank you for watching this. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe to my channel for more. And thank you for coming back if this is not your first time watching me. Until next time, peace be with you.